Welcome to Oshkosh. Feels good to be back. We're excited. Well, starting things off bright and early this morning, we're going to talk about getting back into the aircraft and how ForeFlight can help with that. I know a lot of us probably didn't do as much flying last year, not as many places to go. I know personally our school shut down for a little while, so we didn't get to do a lot there. So we're going to look at how we get back in the aircraft, get recurrent, get up to speed with ForeFlight, and really start getting back out there and exploring again with aviation. My name is Thomas Darty. I am the logbook product manager at ForeFlight. So I handle logbook, track log, and checklist. So we do a lot of the post-flight stuff. Are we showing up there? We're not showing up. There we go. Now you guys can see me. We are over in Hangar C with our ForeFlight booth over there. Please stop by, see us. We've got 2 years worth of new features to show you guys. That's 24 releases of new stuff. It's something like 100+ new features that we would love to walk you guys all the way through. Over in Hangar C, come stop by the ForeFlight booth and get a personal demo on how to run through all of that stuff. We also have our pilot support team on frequency all day long. Team at foreflight.com. If you ever have any questions on how to use ForeFlight, how to use how your account set up, anything like that, feel free to reach out to them. They're all pilots. It's such a wonderful team for us to have in there. They're really helpful in getting anything sorted out. So we're going to start off with a quick update on buying a new iPad. Some of us have some older devices. Maybe it's time to refresh the airplane a little bit. We're maybe getting some new avionics while we're at Oshkosh here. Let's look at maybe updating an iPad to one of the newer versions in there. This is a snippet out of our buying guide, and I highly recommend going through and taking a look at that. But these are the different sizes of iPads and the minimum spec that we recommend for this. So that gives you, an iPad with about 128 gigs worth of memory on it is what we recommend. That's going to allow you to put all of the data in ForeFlight plus any other aviation-related apps that you might want on there. And we recommend the Wi-Fi and cellular model of the iPad. The reason why we recommend the cellular is not that you get a data plan to go with it, but that version of the iPad has a built-in GPS chip. So you've got built-in redundancy into your iPad to show your location in the moving map inside of ForeFlight. So if anything were to happen to the aircraft, you'd have that ready to go right there. The latest version of ForeFlight right now is 13.5. And these are the devices that can support that. So if you've got a device older than that, it's not going to be able to get onto the latest version of ForeFlight. So this would be a good time to start thinking about upgrading and bringing a new device into the cockpit. If you swing by our booth, we're actually demoing 13.6, so there's a couple of new cool features in there you can come play with if you swing by Hangar C. And if you need to get that latest version of ForeFlight, you can always update it through the iOS App Store in there. That's where you get all your updates. Make sure you've got that latest version so that you have all of the tools that we're going to talk about today. We're going to do a real quick refresher on how you navigate around ForeFlight, because this has changed a little bit in the last couple of years. We've moved a couple of things around. When you first launch the app, you're going to be on the airport screen here. And in the upper right-hand corner, you're going to see a search box. That's where you can look up your airport, look up the town you're trying to fly to. Really anything that you want to look up inside of ForeFlight, that search box is going to help you find that. And then along the bottom, that's where our tab bar is. And that's how you navigate through the different features that ForeFlight has to offer for you. So you're looking at things like the Plates tab or the Maps tab. That's how you're going to interact with a lot of this stuff. Under the More tab, this is where everything that we couldn't fit on that tab bar lives. Now, we actually recently released iOS phone parity. So now the app on your iPhone is the same as the app on your iPad. So you're able to go through and use them the same across both devices. It navigates the exact same. And so that tab bar is dynamic. You can actually reorder those tabs to fit the way that you need to by hitting the Edit button in that More view there. But we're going to start off at the very top of that More tab at Logbook, because a lot of us are going to need to figure out what we need to do to get recurrent and what we need to do to get back into the airplane. So let's get started with ForeFlight's digital logbook. ForeFlight has a digital logbook available to you on all subscription levels, free, inside of the app. And it allows you to enter all of your flights, track your currencies, get endorsements from your instructors, anything that you might need in a logbook, and it's all built directly inside of ForeFlight. With some additional great tools like having draft entries created every time you record a track log. So you have almost your entire logbook entry filled out for you right away when you get done flying, just by having that track log come across and make a draft entry for you. Let's get started by going into the logbook and hitting the plus button in the upper right-hand corner, and then adding some certificates in there. I want to put in my commercial certificate, my flight instructor certificate, and make sure that I have all of that info, handy there for me in the app. I can go through and select the type of certificates that I have available, go through and add any of those. So like my medical might be a great place to start. That might be coming up a little bit. I might need to get a new medical here. So I can go through and add that in, and then just fill out my certificate info until I've got all of my licenses in there. And then we need to start putting some entries in here. So we need to move from whatever logbook we were using over to a digital logbook through ForeFlight. And there's a few ways that we can do that. And the way that we decide what method we're going to go with is, what is our goal in this digital logbook here inside of ForeFlight? Do we want a complete record of everything we've ever done in aviation? Or do we want to start using these digital logbook tools and logging inside of ForeFlight moving forward? Do we want to start using that stuff? If you want a complete record of all of your entries inside of ForeFlight, that one's pretty easy. You go through and put all of your entries into ForeFlight. But if you just want to start taking advantage of some of the tools that ForeFlight has to offer for you, there are some methods that we can speed up the conversion process and make it a lot easier for you to start getting the benefits of using the logbook. So the best thing to do is to carry your totals forward. So the same way that I might move from one paper logbook to another paper logbook, where I put a line in to say carried over from previous logbook and carry my totals across, I can do that exact same thing inside of ForeFlight. I can make a single entry and just put all of my times in that entry without an airport destination departure, and ForeFlight will start using all of that in my totals and my recencies and stuff like that. I can also do time-based. Maybe I want to just put in the last 6 months of flying, because I am trying to get recurrent. I want to start taking advantage of some of that currencies for like maybe it's my night currency I want in there, or my instrument currency. And so I might put 6 months worth of flying into my digital logbook and simply put a total line for the rest of it. Or I could just do the last couple of flights in there, so I get a little practice with entries, and then do a total line in there. So there's a lot of options that I have. I don't necessarily have to put every single thing I've done in the airplane into a digital logbook. And then carrying those lines, that total line, carrying those totals forward, I have a couple of options there as well. I can do it, line by line, where I go through and, put everything in. I can do a page summary, so just the line in the bottom of my paper logbook that I've totaled everything up. I can do it by aircraft type, so maybe I want to know all the time I have in a 172 and versus all the time I have in a Piper, and I can put those aircraft totals as I go through. Or I can do time by tail number. I think this one can be particularly helpful if I'm trying to figure out insurance information or anything like that. I might go through and just put in the tail number totals that I have for each of those airplanes. There's a couple of options, and they each have some benefits for you. Whatever I decide, I'm going to want to go ahead and set up a logbook aircraft. These are a little different than flights aircraft that I might have, although if I have an aircraft in flights, it will carry over into my logbook in here. But we'll manually set one up today by simply hitting the plus button in the upper right-hand corner, and then filling out everything that's highlighted in yellow. Those are the required pieces of information for ForeFlight to be able to tell you, your currencies, everything you've got in there. So it's things like engine type, aircraft tail number, things like that that would be important for us to be able to, understand what that airplane is. So I go through and I put all of my entries in. I've got all of my totals. Why am I going through and taking the effort to move over to a digital logbook? And it's really so that I can start getting the benefits of things like having my currency calculated for me. So inside of ForeFlight, on the currency section, and on the left-hand bar inside of logbook, I'm able to put in like my general, my night, my IFR, my medical currency, and have all of that calculated for me so I know exactly when that currency is up. This is very helpful, particularly as we're trying to get back into the aircraft. This is going to let me know what of those currencies I need to go after. Do I need to go do a bunch of landings? Do I need to go read night current? Do I need to go get an IPC? Anything like that is going to be much more obvious because I have this currency section now up to date. And another recent addition is that we can actually do most of this on the web. So we recently launched ForeFlight Logbook on the web last year, where you can go through and use a mouse and a keyboard and do a lot of these same the entries and my entries in my aircraft as I go through. And having that larger screen and a mouse and keyboard like that makes it a lot faster to be able to do these conversions. So that's a big time savings there for you. Now that's a pretty quick how do I go over to digital. We actually have a couple of different webinars on this single subject. So if you are interested in moving over to a digital logbook, we've got a lot more resources on our website, foreflight.com/videos, that really dive deep into how to go through and do this conversion over there. So there's a lot of benefits to it. I recommend watching one of those webinars if you're interested and really want to understand what you're doing. But now I've gone through and done my currency. I know what I need to do to get back into the aircraft. And so it looks like I might need an IPC or a flight review. And so I'm going to want to study for that before I go up in the aircraft and maximize my time, getting back and flying the aircraft instead of remembering what FAR is which. So I'm going to use the Documents tab inside of ForeFlight to do a lot of that studying for me. Some of you may have already been using this for aircraft documents, maybe using some other things in here. It's a great resource to have there. But one of the things that I really love is included in all of the US subscriptions is every FAA handbook inside of the FAA drive. So anything that you used to buy, like pilot's handbook, instrument handbook, anything like that, is available for you just in the documents drive, included with your subscription. So I can go through and go into my the FAA drive, look up the FAA handbooks folder in there, and then I can see all sorts of great resources. I've got my ACS in here, even things like the Aerodynamics for Naval Aviators, a great book if you're trying to learn a little bit more about aviation. There's some really good resources in there. And again, they're just included with your subscription. Makes it a lot easier. You don't have to lug around a flight bag with 10 or 12 books just because you want to have those resources there available for you. I make really good use of this folder. So, I've done a bit of studying. I need to understand what I'm going to do for my flight review. And we can use that same FAA drive in the FARs folder, where I can go in and look up a current version of all of the FARs. So I can go through and select Part 91, as that's got all of my flight review information. And then I can use the search icon in the upper right-hand corner and look up flight review or look up IPC and find the exact information that I'm looking for. I can then go through and tap the little pencil icon, that's our annotation icon, and I can highlight important pieces of information. I can add bookmarks for myself so I can make it easier to go look something up as I go through. This is a really handy resource. You don't need to always have every question right on the top of your mind when you go into a flight review. You're not really expected to know every FAR. But if you open up ForeFlight and your FARs are all highlighted and it's clear that you've been studying in there, it's pretty obvious that you've taken the time to get back into the aircraft here and you are up to speed. I can also look up things like my instrument proficiency list. I can go into the ACS and actually look up the table for what is required of me to do an IPC. So I can go to I think it's the very back of the ACS, has a table for the tasks you need to complete for an IPC. Makes it very easy for me if I want to put together a flight plan that's going to match the requirements of the IPC with my instructor. I know exactly what those are. I can prepare for each of those maneuvers before I go out on the aircraft and make that a much smoother process for me to do. And now that I know what I'm going to do, I'm going to put a little bit of it to practice on the cheap. We don't really want to pay an instructor. We don't want to necessarily pay for a rental aircraft to go do all of this stuff. So we're going to actually connect ForeFlight to some flight sims on the ground so I can practice all of these maneuvers. And that way I'm just even more proficient when I get into the airplane. So we have a wide selection of flight sims that we can connect to. Things like Microsoft Flight Sim, Prepared 3D, some actual installed flight sims like Redbirds. If you have a school nearby that has an installed official sim, to even things like Infinite Flight. That's one of my favorites, as you can get it on a mobile device. So if you have your phone and your iPad with you, you can actually fly Infinite Flight on your phone while practicing for-flight maneuvers on your iPad in there and really be proficient with all of that. So you can do a lot of chair flying before you ever walk to the airport. Very handy tool to have. We also have a Flight Sim Connect guide in the pilot's guide in there. And we also have another webinar entirely based on connecting for-flights to sims. So if you want to know more about how you can practice on the ground, those are great resources to look up. Feeling pretty prepared for this. I've read all my documents. I know what's in the IPC. Now I just need to find some place to fly. So I'm going to look up some details about nearby airports. Maybe I moved last year, and I'm not all that familiar with the nearby fields. I need to find a new flight school. I need to find a new instructor. So on the Maps tab, I'm going to see my location on there, my blue dots. That's my own ship icon. That lets me know where I am. And I can just see what airports are nearby. Maybe I'm not familiar with all of the municipal airports that are near me, and this is a really easy way for me to look all of that up. I can then tap on one of those airports and get the new Maps sidebar that has all of the airport information in it. And if I hit the FBO button, I can look up what services are at that field. So I can go through and maybe find like Texas State Aviation and see that they have rental aircraft and instruction available. I can see who to contact at that facility so that I can call them up, book a flight review, book an IPC, and I've got all of that ready to go. So it's a really easy way to sort of use it as a directory to find those nearby services if I may be somewhere that I'm less familiar with those airports. Talk to my instructor. Got a plan for our flight review here. So now I need to do some flight planning for it. So let's go over a brief review of how you do some easy VFR flight planning inside of ForeFlight. So I'm going to hit the FPL button along the top bar on the Maps tab, and that brings up what we call the Flight Plan drawer. And this is where I can do a lot of the editing for my flight. So I'll go through and type in or hit the Add to Route button there on my looked up airport, as that's what I'm going to be flying out of. I can also type that airport in because I know the identifier for it. And that will add a little route bubble for me that's my departure airport out of that field. And then my instructor told me that, we'll go fly over to Lockhart. And I agreed to it because that sounds like my instructor told me we were going to go do it. But I don't actually know where that airport is. So I'm going to hit that search bar in the upper right-hand corner, and I can actually just type in the name of the town that my instructor told me we were going to go fly over to there. So I'll just type in Lockhart, and I can see all of the airports nearby. So Lockhart Municipal in Texas Air sounds like probably the right one we're going to go to. So I can just look that up, hit the Add to Route button, and now I've got both of my airports in a direct to route all set up, ready to go. There's my VFR flight planning. I know what my route, my heading, my distance between all of that is. Nice and easy. Now, I've never been to Lockhart, and I'd kind of like to prepare before I go in and make sure I don't mess up that first VFR traffic pattern. Usually not a good way to start my flight review. So I'm going to hit the Procedures tab along the right-hand side of the Flight Plan drawer and bring up our Procedures Planner there. And then I'm going to select, let me go back, there we go. I'm going to select Traffic Pattern as one of the options that I have. And this allows me to actually put into my route all of the different traffic pattern entry options that I might have for each of the runways at the airport. So I can see each runway. I can see details about that runway. I can see its dimensions, its surface type. And if I have a current METAR from them on the internet, I should be able to look up what runway has the best winds in there. It'll show me the METAR along the bottom, and then it'll highlight which runway is actually the best runway for the winds. I'll select the one I want, and now I can see all of the options that I might have to enter that traffic pattern. I can see my traffic pattern altitude at the top, both in AGL and MSL in there. And then I can see that 45 entry sounds like a pretty good option for me. So I'll select that and then hit Add to Route along the bottom. And now I have a 45-degree entry to the downwind as part of my route into Lockhart for runway 36 in there. Easy as that. But I can go one step further and be even more prepared, because I'm probably not going to be staring at my iPad the entire time I'm flying into this airport. I want to be outside looking for traffic, getting used to flying. So I'm going to prepare for what I can see visually outside of the airplane as we enter this pattern. So on the map layer selector in the upper left-hand corner of the Maps tab there, I'm going to find this, the aerial map view in there. This is a satellite and aerial imagery view that I can overlay into the map inside of ForeFlight. So I can then go through and look at where my pattern lines up and where like roads, fields, or landmarks that I can see visually outside the aircraft are. This is really helpful as you're going in to get your spacing from the runway correctly, to understand where a good point for your turn to base is, as you're going to be dealing with a lot of other stuff, maybe in an unfamiliar airplane at an unfamiliar airport. Knowing where some of this stuff lines up there for you is going to be a lot easier, and it's going to keep you ahead of the aircraft. I can also take it one step further. In our performance tier, I can look up the 3D view of the airport. So I can take that same satellite imagery and I can overlay it onto terrain and preview what that airport looks like in 3D as I look around. I can also tap on traffic targets as they're flying through, thanks to our internet traffic layer with FlightAware, and I can see how other aircraft are entering the traffic pattern and flying around that airport. It's helpful to get myself up with local procedures. It's been very fun to watch airplanes come in to Oshkosh here with this. It makes it a lot better to have all of that picture in your head before you fly to a new airport. I can also go through and look up the profile view. It's a pretty quick flight. We're not going to get very high. I'm unfamiliar with towers or other obstacles that might be in the way. So I can use ForeFlight's profile view to actually look all of that information up and understand that I don't have anything on my route there, and I should be okay. I use this even in Central Texas, where we don't have a whole lot of mountains that we need to dodge. This is still very helpful for obstacles and things like that. So I just have that peace of mind before I go fly to that airport. We've got a lot more in VFR flight planning tips. We're actually hosting a whole series of webinars over in Pavilion 8 on fundamentals and what's new. Swing by the booth. We've got a full schedule for you and everything in there, and there's a lot more to learn about how you could do some VFR flight planning. Let's move on to IFR flight planning. A little bit more complicated here, and get ready for our IPC. So I've got a route here down to Corpus. I'm going to go fly some approaches in there. So I've already put in my 2 airports. I can see that in my layer selector, I've got my IFR load chart. I can bring that in and see exactly how my route is shown on there. So if I want to go do some more kind of traditional walkthrough with my instructor of my cross country, I can have my IFR load chart there, look for all the familiar icons, and do my planning that way as well. And then I'm going to use that profile view we looked at, but instead of looking at terrain, I'm going to use it to look at airspace. I'm going to be flying through some alerts, some MOAs along this route, and using the airspace inside of Profile allows me to understand not only how am I interacting with those airspaces laterally, but how am I interacting with them vertically. Is it something that I can just climb 500 feet higher and not have to worry about at all? Am I right in the middle of it and I might need to divert around it? Anything like that, this view really helps you understand what that airspace looks like. So I've got a couple of things here. When I tap on the profile airspace, it's also going to highlight that on the map, making it even faster for me to understand exactly which airspace I'm looking at along my route and plan around it if I need to. I also have access to our routes button along the flight planning drawer, and this allows me to pretty much get an automated flight plan built. So I can tap on that, and I can see previously ATC cleared routes between these 2 airports. Very handy, as if ATC previously cleared an airplane along that route, there's a high chance that they'll probably clear somebody around it again. I can see which aircraft and how recently they flew that. But I can also see things like our recommended route option in here. This is going to use our routing engine to look at those ATC cleared routes, but also look at your aircraft performance and the winds and temps aloft on that day to give you an optimum route. So it's going to look through all of those things, make sure that when you walk out to the aircraft, not only you're on the most fuel efficient and time efficient route, but you're going to get cleared as filed when you walk out and hop on the radios. And that's really going to save time as we go through. I'll go ahead and select one of our airway ones today and hit select to route. And now I've got all of that loaded into ForeFlight. So there was an entire airway planning between these two airports with a couple of clicks or a couple of taps there on my iPad. I now have airways around all of that airspace and makes it a lot easier for me to get to my new airport. I can look at that procedures tab that we looked at earlier for traffic patterns, but this time let's look at it for instrument approaches. So I can go through and tap approach. I can see all of the runways that are available, all of the approach types that are available. Here I had a current METAR, so I can even see what runway has the best winds on it, so I can be prepared for that of what runway they're going to be using. I can tap on it and see all of the initial approach fixes available for me, and laid out on my approach plate with my route into the airport, so I understand which of those is going to line up best with my approach, or with my arrival into the airport. And I can even go through and set things like the minimums for that airport so that I can remind myself exactly where I need to stop. I'll see that displayed on the map. I'll see that displayed on the plate in there. It makes it much easier for me to see all of that. And then I just hit add to route, and ForeFlight's going to bring that approach plate onto the map for me with that route for my initial approach fix down to the runway and my minimums in there. And now I've got that entire approach ready to go. I can make sure that I'm lined up for it correctly. Very easy. And then just like we looked at that airport in 3D to understand how traffic flows into it, I can actually preview this entire flight in 3D, including my approach with the altitudes for each of the waypoints. As I fly through, I can see what terrain looks like, I can see what nearby landmarks are going to be, and I can see where my altitude is, what kind of descent or climb I might need out of something if I'm going to try and make it between those two altitudes. And having that mental picture means I'm that much further ahead of the aircraft before I even get in the airplane. So now that we know where we're going, let's go ahead and get downloaded and make sure that I have everything ready and saved on my iPad when I walk out and I don't have internet inside the aircraft. So we're going to use Pack to do that. So I've got my whole route ready to go, and I'm going to hit the little suitcase icon along the bottom of the flight planning drawer, and that is my Pack icon. ForeFlight's going to look at all of the data that I have downloaded onto my device already, and all of the data along my route that I might want for that flight, and tell me what I don't have. This is what I use every flight to ensure that I've gotten everything that I might need for the flight, including things like the latest weather, the latest fuel prices. TFRs is great through this. I use this for TFRs so that I have like the latest version before I get airborne and ADS-B starts to pick up updates from that. I always pack right before we walk out to the airplane. So we have that little gap, we have the latest weather and TFRs before we go fly. All I need to do is hit the Pack button in the lower corner there, and ForeFlight will automatically download all of that for me and give me my nice little all pack icon. Now, how do I unpack all of this information? ForeFlight does all of that for me. So the things like the weather and the TFRs, I access those the exact same way that I access any other piece of information inside of ForeFlight. So if I want to look up the METAR, I can go to the airport, and the METAR will be there loaded for me, ready to go. If I want to look up TFRs along the flight, I just turn the TFR layer on the map on, and I've got all of that ready to go. Once that data is no longer valid, it's either been replaced by something newer, or it's expired, ForeFlight will automatically delete it off of the device for me, so I don't continually fill up my device more and more packing as I go along. Now we're going to fly a couple of approaches once we get down there, and I'm going to set up a plate binder so I've got all of those organized and ready to go, and I can easily flip through them when we're in the airplane. So I'm going to use ForeFlight's new plate binder option. On the Plates tab, I'm going to hit Add New Flight Binder. And I can see a few options to import destinations and departures here. one of them from my maps, and one of them from the flights tab, where I would go ahead and like file this flight plan through. So I'll pick whatever one is correct here. We'll go ahead and pick the one from maps. And ForeFlight's going to load in as much information as it can right away. This might look familiar if any of you have ever been JEP pilots through like Mobile Flight Deck or anything like that. This is what Jeppesen uses, the style that they use for all of their airline plates, where I have my departure airport diagram. I've got maybe a departure procedure. I can load an approach back into that departure airport in case I have an issue and need to get back in. I can have my arrival, my approach into the airport, and the airport diagram all in order, ready to go for me. So I can just tap on what I want. I can change the airport. I can change the plate. Along the top of the plate there, I can see that I have NOTAMs at that airport that apply to this approach. So if there's, I'm not going to see taxiway NOTAMs on the approach plate there, but I may see something like runway out of service, or a particular nav aid is down. And I'm going to want to know that before I try and fly that approach. My IPC probably won't go as well if I ask for an approach that is not available due to a nav aid being down. We can tap on the airport along the left-hand side there if I want to change to a different airport. Maybe we get a diversion and I need to look at new airports as we go through. Instructors love to give diversions on training flights like that. And I can tap on any of the categories for plates, like approaches or arrivals, and see all of my available options and choose a different approach if ATC gives me something, or I just want to switch to a different approach as I go through. So I'll select the one that I want, and now I've got a binder set up with all of these things in order. The reason I like having all of this set up in order is I can then take 3 fingers and swipe across the plate on the Plates tab and move in between those plates in order. So as I go ahead and taxi out, I've got my airport diagram up. I can then 3-finger swipe across and see my departure procedure. I can then 3-finger swipe and see my arrival. Same onto my approach and my airport diagram again. So it makes it very easy for me to navigate around and be, like I said, ahead of the airplane when we go out here with all of these plates in order, briefed, ready to go. We're also going to need to file our flight plan. So we'll take the flight plan that we planned on maps, and we'll hit the Send To button. That's that little square with an up arrow on it at the bottom of the flight plan drawer. You'll see that a lot of places throughout the app. It's an excellent thing to go through and just tap wherever you see it. See where you can send in the information that you're looking at that tab in ForeFlight. There's a lot of helpful things that you can do with that. And I'm going to select the flights option when it pops up. And that's going to take all of the planning that I had on the Maps tab and send it over to the Flights tab, where I can do things like my takeoff calculations. I can file my IFR flight plan. A lot of great information there. I'm going to hit Briefing along the top and get a weather briefing for our flight. We often get asked if this is an official weather briefing. So all that really means is that it is tracked and you can prove that you got one. So when you tap Briefing there, it's saved on your device, so you have that briefing to reference whenever you're in the air. It's saved on the ForeFlight servers so that you requested one and we sent it to you, and then it's saved with the FAA in there. So if anything were to ever happen and you needed to prove that you got a briefing, there's 3 places that you can go to say, yes, I got a weather briefing before I went on my flight. I also like some of the ways that ForeFlight is able to make that briefing easier for me to interpret. One of them that I like is in the TAF section under Forecasts. ForeFlight's going to look at my departure time and my performance over each of the airports or waypoints as I go through, and it's going to tell me which block of the TAF is active for each of those airports. So no longer do I have to look up what are all the airports along my route, look at to see if they have a TAF, figure out the conversion from local, given my departure time and my time over that airport. All of that's done. ForeFlight can just present that information to me, and it makes it a lot faster for me to look through those TAFs and understand the weather that we're going to run into today. Once I've gone through and looked at all of my stuff on the Flights tab and I feel good to go, I can hit the Proceed to File button in the lower right-hand corner, and ForeFlight will generate a filing form for me to send off to the FAA. Now, everything's switched over to the ICAO flight plan forms. So instead of needing to relearn how to put any of that through, ForeFlight's just going to use that ICAO form for me, and I have my filing form all filled out, ready to go. And there's a lot of benefits to filing with ForeFlight. I have things like setting up my ICAO code automatically if I filed with that aircraft before. I have the ability to get adverse weather alerts sent to my device after I filed. If a new system pops up, if there's like a new AirMet or SIGMET, I can have that sent to my device. I can get my expected route back from ATC sent back to my device, so I can be prepared for that when I walk out to the aircraft. And I can even get notices of things like expected departure time if I'm flying out of an airport that I'm expecting some kind of delay. So a lot of benefits to filing just inside of ForeFlight, let alone how easy it is to send my flight plan over to Flight and file it. Sentry. We're going to be doing a lot of flying. It's going to be a lot of things that I want to get good at again. And I'm going to want to have all of the situational awareness that I can bring into the aircraft with me. And Sentry is going to help me do that. Sentry is ForeFlight's portable ADS-B unit, a little white box. We've got a couple of them over in the booth that you can demo, and we're selling them actually at a 5% discount for our show special this year. So swing on by and check that out. It's a great addition to the airplane. It's got a lot of things it's going to bring with me. It's got ADS-B weather. It's got dual-band ADS-B traffic. It's a WAAS GPS unit, so I can get highly accurate GPS position brought over to ForeFlight for me. It's got a 12-hour battery, so it long outlasts me in the airplane. It's got a built-in AHRS gyro, so I can use my iPad as a backup attitude indicator if something were to happen to the instruments in my aircraft. It's got a carbon monoxide sensor, so if I have a leak in the cowl or anything like that, I'm alerted to that before it's going to start really impacting me. It's about the size of a deck of playing cards. It's very portable, easy to bring with you. And like I said, we've got them at a 5% discount over in the booth this year, so a great investment in the airplane. Let's look at some of the tools we can bring in flight to boost up that situational awareness using that Sentry and using ForeFlight. So one of the first things I'm going to turn on in the Maps settings here is the distance ring. So I'm on the Maps tab. I'm going to hit the little gear icon along the top to bring up my settings. And I'm going to scroll down until I see distance rings. There's a lot of great tools in there. Turn that one on, and I can now see different rings outside of my aircraft at set intervals. So I've got it set to automatic distance right now, so I can see 5, 10, maybe 20 miles out there. I also see a little green triangle, a little caret along those rings, and that's actually my ground course in there. So I can use the ring and that little caret to really figure out where the aircraft is going to be at that time. But I can take it one step further. If I go into the settings under the More tab and look up distance rings, I can find the distance ring styles setting. And I can actually move it from distance to time. And this is the one that I really like to use. So now I've got my distance ring set up. There we go. I got my distance ring set up, and instead of showing me where my aircraft is going to be in 10 miles or 20 miles, it's going to show me where the aircraft's going to be in 5 minutes or 10 minutes. This is really helpful, and I use it a lot when I fly into uncontrolled airports. If I've got other aircraft in the pattern, it's a lot more helpful for me to be able to say, well, we'll be entering the downwind in about 5 minutes. So that helps them plan out, okay, well, where are we in the traffic pattern? Okay, I think we can slot in here and really do that planning at an uncontrolled airport and make things a lot easier for me. I'm not trying to kind of communicate blindly with other aircraft. I also have the Glide Advisor under that same map settings. This is going to put a ring around my aircraft that lets me know that if I had an engine failure right now and pitched for best glide, where my aircraft could make it. This uses the winds aloft forecast that we have and our terrain model to map out where that glide ring is. So this gives me a good estimate of where I can bring that airplane and where I shouldn't aim for as I go through. This is a great peace of mind while you're flying around, so that if something were to happen, I can know that I have that there ready to go. I use that a lot. We're probably going to get a diversion and an emergency in a flight review. It's not much of a flight review if they don't make you do a little bit of work for it. So if we've got a divert and we got some kind of emergency, I can use that glide advisor to know, there's an airport within range for us. I can use things like that distance ring and taking 2 fingers at the same time and tapping them into the map to bring up the ruler. And this allows me to measure things on the ForeFlight map as I go through. I use this because it's got the heading, the time, and the fuel burn between those 2 points based on my aircraft. So if I want to divert to an airport maybe 50 miles away and I need to know if I'm going to have enough fuel to make that diversion, I can go through and measure that out very quickly and see exactly where I can go there. I also like to use the ruler in conjunction with the profile that we looked at earlier, because the profile then switches to show me exactly what's underneath the ruler. So as I move the ruler around on the map, that profile view is going to be updated with airspace, terrain, and obstacles, so I can plan out, can we actually make it over that ridge over there? Can I make it through that pass using that ruler tool? It's a really handy way to understand that there aren't any obstacles before you commit to a diversion. We can use the checklist inside of ForeFlight. ForeFlight's got a great library of aircraft pre-built into its checklist library, but it's also got great tools to build your own checklist as you go through. So if you've got an aircraft that you've made the checklist for or has like a home-built checklist, you can go through and bring all of those in, build your own checklist, have it saved directly inside of ForeFlight so you're not trying to keep track of all of your paper. And then you can use the checklist speak function so that ForeFlight can actually be your co-pilot and read out the call and response items for your checklist as you're flying along. So if you're single pilot IFR flying through, this is going to bring basically a crew resource for you to read all of those items out so you can go through your flows while ForeFlight verifies each of the items in there. Really handy tool. I like it because it reads a little slower and it helps keep me calm if we're going through like an emergency checklist to make sure that I'm doing the correct actions as we go through, and kind of helps prevent any of that panic switch flipping there. I can also annotate pretty much everywhere inside of ForeFlight or write on things in ForeFlight. So I can go to an approach plate. I can mark it up with highlights, boxes, text, notes. This is really helpful if your instructor is trying to tell you that, oh, be careful here. There's they're going to make us switch frequencies about right here. I go ahead and just put a note right there on the plate that we're going to switch frequencies right there. And I have all of that ready to go. So I'm that much more ahead of the aircraft. And then when we're in flying the approach, I've got that note for me. I can write annotations on the map. In fact, if I have an Apple Pencil with me, I don't even have to hit any particular button. I can just pull the Apple Pencil out and start writing on the iPad while I'm in flight on the Maps tab, and ForeFlight will just go ahead and annotate that for me. So it just starts writing right on the map. It's the closest thing to paper. It's really nice. And I use that for a lot of vectors from ATC. As ATC is giving me altitude and headings to fly through, I write them right there on the map where ATC gave me those. And those map annotations stay relative in their position. So as I pan and zoom around, it stays next to the waypoint that I wrote it on in there. So I have a reference where this is exactly where I got that altitude change. This is exactly where I got that heading change. And it makes it very easy for me as I go through my flight. I also use it for things like make sure you do a fuel check here. Like if I know that I want to switch fuel at a certain point, or I know that I want to call up on a particular frequency, I go ahead and pre-write that next to that point on my map so that I have that saved and ready to go. And then I can bring in synthetic vision as we fly through the approach. So as I'm going through, it's going to be that first ILS after a while is always a little tense, as you knock the rust off. Being able to bring up synthetic vision, see traffic and obstacles as I fly through, and see that there's a runway dead ahead makes it just that I'm that much calmer. I know I'm on the right approach. I can see the runway out in front of me. Makes it a lot easier for me to focus on flying the airplane as we go through. And lastly, let's talk about how we post-flight as we go through and do our review, do our IPC. How do we then make sure that we've got this logged correctly and debrief with our instructor to see if there's anything that we need to work on? So because I was flying with... Getting started today. because I was flying with ForeFlight and I had my Sentry on board, I recorded a track log as we went through our flight. And I recorded a very accurate track log with that WASP GPS. ForeFlight's going to take that track log and automatically make a draft logbook entry for me. So I have my route that I flew, the times that I took off, and the number of landings and takeoffs that I did. ForeFlight can go ahead and calculate all of those for me and bring them into a logbook entry, so I just have one less thing to worry about. I can then tap on that logbook entry, or that track log, and I can break down specifically what we did as we were flying through. So here we are looking at an actual flight review of mine from a couple of years ago, where I can see my exact position, I can see my altitude and speed as we fly around the pattern. If my instructor lost count of how many landings we did, that's perfectly fine. I'll just go through my track log and count every time we touch down as we go through. I think you can see exactly which one is our short approach here as we cut in a little tighter on one of those. What an awesome debriefing tool to be able to look back and say, this is the approach where, we got a little distracted there. We went a little long on our downwind. Look where that put us on base. Look what that did to our approach path as we went through. Makes it a lot easier to have those conversations. And I can tap that 3D button there, and I can review this entire flight in 3D with my pitch and bank information from the AHRS built into Sentry. So I can see as my aircraft goes around my approach entry, I can see what my bank looks like. I can see exactly how I entered that procedure turn, how that lined up on me. Do I need to turn out earlier? Am I not being aggressive enough with my turn in here? Was I not accounting for winds enough? These are conversations and discussions with an instructor that are a lot easier when I have a visual aid to go through and look at all of them. And lastly, we'll go back, and now that we've understood our flight and we're going to get signed off to go back into the airplane, I'll go back into my logbook. I can go through and add each of the pieces of data here. If I've got like Hobbs time, if I want to have it as PIC, if I want to have it as dual given in there, specific things like that, I can add them all in. I can add our approaches, so I can say, these are the different approaches that we flew. And I also have these used buttons on a lot of these fields that are going to be based off things like maybe my total time. And so I can see that instead of having to type in the same number for dual received here, I can just hit the use button and ForeFlight will fill in that same time for me. So because I had an instructor on board the whole time, I can just tap that button. Logging is so much faster and easier. I don't have to add all of that stuff in. And then because we're offline, I'm going to have my instructor sign this off for me. So they're going to hit the add instructor signature. I can request a signature remotely from them, or I can go ahead and have them sign it right there directly onto my iPad. So they put in their instructor information, they hit the Sign Now button, and they're able to go through and sign that logbook entry for me. Once I sign that logbook entry, everything above that signature becomes locked until I delete out that signature. So if I have an edit or anything like that, I can delete the signature, make the edit, and have my instructor re-sign it. But I can't edit anything without my instructor being able to go through and reapprove that and re-sign that logbook. So it's not like you're able to go through and say, I was actually a couple hundred hours on that flight into my logbook. Look, my instructor said so. That's all locked down. Things below it, those I can go ahead and edit. And one of those that we're going to look at here is the flight tags. So the flight tags on a logbook entry are not the endorsement for my IPC or my flight review. These are just the thing that I put onto an entry to let ForeFlight know that I went and did this event. So I'm going to go ahead and put on maybe my flight review, my IPC, and now that currency that we looked at the very beginning here is updated to know that I've done these events on this flight in there. But I still need to go through and get an endorsement from my instructor to actually sign me off for that event. So we're going to go to the qualification section. I'm going to hit the little plus button in the upper right-hand corner and select endorsements, and that's going to bring up my endorsement view. Now, my instructor doesn't need to remember the exact text out of the AC to say, that I signed this person off for a flight review or I gave this person an IPC. They can hit the lookup button next in that field, and actually search through the database of all of the endorsements out of the advisory circular and load that text directly into my, my endorsement form here. As an instructor, it is such a huge help. I've worked at flight schools that used to have like stickers for a lot of this stuff. This is so much nicer. It's right here on my logbook. I just fill out the student's information, the gray text in here. Once that's all filled out, I can sign it, and I can add it to that student's logbook, and now that is a legal endorsement that they've got an IPC, or they've got a flight review. They've got their currencies all set up. They're back practicing the airplane. They're obviously familiar how to use ForeFlight, so I'm confident that that person can go and operate the aircraft in there. So it's about 50 minutes. You guys ready to go fly again? I'm excited. There is so much more to learn about ForeFlight, though. I mean, it is a massive app, and it can do so many cool things for us. So we've got a lot of ways that you can learn more. You've got the pilot's guide built directly into the documents catalog that we looked at earlier under the ForeFlight drive. That is your user's manual for the app right there ready to go for you. One of the things that I really like about that is the change log at the very end of the pilot's guide. I myself use that a lot when we put out updates. I go to the very back, I can see what each version of ForeFlight changed. I can tap on it and get linked directly to the pilot's guide article about using that feature. So I can get up to speed with graphics and information on how to use that new feature. We also have foreflight.com/videos. It's our YouTube channel, where we have full-length webinars like this. We have product feature highlights, like how to use those new features in there. We've got tons of great information on there. It's an excellent free resource for you to use to get even better at flying with ForeFlight. And then we've got things like our blog and our newsletter, so that you can stay up to date with new releases or things that are going on. Recently, many of you probably got an email that we were testing out the new version of iOS. Every time that there is a new iOS release, we take it, our whole QA team switches over to validating that everything inside of ForeFlight still works on that version of iOS, that it didn't disable any critical functions for you. That's why we tell you to wait. And then we give you the all clear, because none of our functionality got broken with that new version of iOS update in there. So the newsletter, the blog, those are great places to keep up to date with, have they cleared that new version for us. And then once again, we are on frequency all the time, 7 days a week. Team@foreflight.com, that's our pilot support team. Please reach out to them. The thing that I love about them being all pilots is you don't even necessarily need to know what it is inside of ForeFlight that you're trying to do. They've all been in the airplane there. So you can say, hey, I'm flying an approach, and I'm having trouble, bringing up frequencies quick enough. I'm having trouble understanding, what my minimum altitudes are as I need to go through. What can ForeFlight do to help me, do that faster? They've been there. They can give you all the tips on how to do different things, annotate all that stuff. It's really helpful to have real pilots as your support team. So with that, please come by, see us in Hangar C. See some of our other presentations throughout the week and everything like that. I hope you guys enjoy Oshkosh again. We're excited to be back. It feels good to be back in Wisconsin. Thank you.